Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Immigration, Senator Watt. Australia is experiencing the largest immigration intake on record. Australian Bureau of Statistics figures show 518,000 net overseas migrants arrived last year, and 55,375 migrants arrived in January this year alone. 55,375 migrants in 1 month, 40% higher than the previous January record way back in 2009. Minister, how many migrants is this government going to let in this year?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Roberts. The first thing I'd like to say is that the Albanese Government is very proud of the multicultural nature of the Australian population. And I heard you earlier today in another debate, Senator Roberts, acknowledge that your own family has a fairly recent history of migration. And I think we should all recognise the very valuable contribution that migrants have played and continue to play in Australia. Having said that, we do acknowledge that there has been an increase in migration to Australia, particularly as a result of the pause to migration that occurred through the pandemic. The figures that have come out today are entirely expected and are consistent with the forecasts for net overseas migration that we set out in the mid-year budget review at the end of last year. Migration levels are expected to have peaked in 2022-23 and are forecast to drop in half by next year. So our government is doing the hard work, not done before under the former government, to bring migration back to sustainable levels after all comparable countries also experienced a surge post-pandemic. The changes that we made late last year are having a significant immediate impact. For example, student visa grants are down more than 35% on last year's level. And I know for a fact that, Minister O'Neill, Minister Clare, Minister O'Connor have been working very hard on trying to tackle some of the rorts that were left behind in the international student visa system, and that is having results with bringing those student visa grants down by more than 35% on last year's level. The data which has been released today doesn't take into account the very substantial actions that our government has taken to bring down net overseas migration, and that's because most of those actions were implemented mid-late last year. But we recognise this is an issue for Australians and we're taking action to deal with it.
Thank you, Senator Watt. Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. With people in Queensland, working families at real jobs, now living in tents, caravans, parks, cars, under bridges, there is a human catastrophe unfolding in this country, in our state. Will you suspend further immigration until everyone who is here now has a bed to sleep in and with a roof overhead?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Roberts. I absolutely acknowledge that our country has a housing shortage. We have acknowledged that since the day that we were elected and had to deal with the massive housing shortage and housing affordability crisis that was left behind by the former government. And that is exactly why we have been presenting a range of options to this parliament to deal with housing shortages, including the creation of the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund. Now, Senator Roberts, for someone who says that we should have more housing to deal with this, I'm surprised that you and Senator Hanson voted against the Housing Australia Future Fund. And in fact, I was reminded that Senator Hanson, in the last 24 hours or so, has described the Housing Australia Future Fund as useless. So you continue to argue that we need more housing, just as the Coalition argues for more housing, but when you have an opportunity to do something about it, what do? You vote no. And we know that you're intending to vote no to the Help to Buy legislation as well. So be consistent. If you want more housing, vote for it.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Minister, is immigration too high?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Roberts. Well, the government is already taking action to try to deal with the increase in migration that we experienced after the pandemic, just as all other comparable nations experienced after the pandemic. That's why we've made changes to student visa grants, down by more than 35% on last year's level, the settings that were left behind by the former government. That's why we've taken a range of other actions to fix the utterly broken migration system that was left behind by Mr Dutton, the former Home Affairs Minister, and yet again we're fixing up the former government's mess, while at the same time we're trying to build homes, even though we are obstructed every step of the way by the Coalition, One Nation and all too often the Greens Party. I heard an interjection before that people don't want public housing, they want home ownership. First, they do want public housing, and second of all, home ownership is exactly what we're trying to through our Help to Buy scheme. It's in the name, Help to Buy.
Thank you, Minister Watt.